There's something quietly profound about the way certain people move through the world. You notice it in how they handle conflict, not with the desperate urgency of someone trying to prove a point, but with a measured patience that feels almost foreign in today's culture. You see it in how they listen to music, not as background noise while multitasking, but as something that deserves their full attention. These are the people who grew up in the 1970s, and there's a psychological fingerprint that decade left on their minds that shapes everything from how they form relationships to how they process stress. What makes this generation psychologically unique isn't just what they experienced, but when they experienced it. The 1970s was a cultural bridge between the structured formality of previous decades and the technological acceleration that would define everything afterward. Children who came of age during this time developed cognitive patterns that researchers are now recognizing as fundamentally different from both their predecessors and successors. Their brains were wired during a moment in history that would never repeat itself. The psychology of 1970s. Children begins with something most people overlook: boredom. Real, deep, uninterrupted boredom. These were kids who spent entire summer afternoons lying on their backs in the grass, watching clouds drift across the sky without feeling the need to document the experience or share it with anyone. They learned to be alone with their thoughts in ways that feel almost impossible to imagine now. This wasn't neglect or lack of stimulation. It was space. Mental space that allowed their developing minds to create internal worlds rich enough to sustain hours of contemplation. Psychologically, this created what researchers call enhanced introspective capacity. People who grew up in the 70s developed an unusual comfort with silence and solitude. They learned to generate entertainment from within rather than consume it from external sources. This manifested in adulthood as individuals who can sit in waiting rooms without immediately reaching for their phones, who can take long walks without podcast or music, who can be present in conversations without the mental restlessness that plagues generations raised on constant stimulation. But the boredom was just the beginning. The 1970s was also a decade of subtle social revolution happening at kitchen table level. These children witnessed their parents navigating massive cultural shifts around gender roles, work expectations, and family structures. But they processed these changes through the lens of childhood observation rather than adult analysis. They absorbed the tension without fully understanding its source, creating a psychological adaptation that would serve them throughout their lives. This manifested as what psychologists now recognize as contextual flexibility. Adults who grew up in the 70s tend to be remarkably adaptable to changing social norms while maintaining a strong sense of personal identity. They learned early that the world around them could shift dramatically, while their core sense of self remained stable. This created individuals who can navigate modern workplace cultures, changing relationship dynamics, and technological disruption with less anxiety than you might expect. The media landscape of the 1970s also shaped their psychological development in profound ways. These were children who experienced entertainment as appointment television, where missing your favorite show meant waiting weeks or months to see it again. This created a relationship with anticipation that feels almost quaint now. They learned to savor the build-up to special events, to find satisfaction in waiting, to appreciate delayed gratification in ways that extend far beyond entertainment choices. In their adult relationships, this translates to individuals who don't expect constant contact or immediate responses. They're comfortable with the spaces between conversations, with relationships that unfold slowly over time rather than demanding instant intimacy. They learned that good things come to those who wait, not as a moral lesson, but as a lived experience reinforced hundreds of times throughout their childhood. The music of the 1970s deserves special attention in understanding this generation's psychology. These children experienced music as a full sensory event. Albums were listened to from beginning to end, lyrics were studied by reading liner notes, and discovering new music required genuine effort and often social connection. This created what researchers call deep engagement patterns. Rather than skimming the surface of many experiences, they learned to dive deeply into fewer experiences. As adults, this shows up in how they approach hobbies, relationships, and even career choices. They're more likely to develop genuine expertise in areas that interest them, rather than dabbling in many different pursuits. They form fewer but deeper friendships. They read books rather than articles, take vacations to places they return to multiple times, rather than constantly seeking novel destinations. This isn't rigidity, it's psychological depth, cultivated during a time when depth was the natural outcome of limited options. The economic backdrop of the 1970s also left its mark on their developing minds. These children lived through gas shortages, inflation, and economic uncertainty, but they experienced it through the filter of family adaptation rather than personal responsibility. They watched their parents make do with less, repair things instead of replacing them, and find creative solutions to resource limitations. This embedded a psychological resilience that serves them well in adulthood. Unlike generations that experienced economic hardship as adults with full understanding of its implications, or generations that grew up with abundance as the norm, 1970s children internalized resourcefulness as a natural way of being. They learned that comfort and security could coexist with uncertainty, that creativity often emerges from constraint, and that material limitations don't necessarily correlate with life satisfaction. This created adults who are psychologically equipped to handle economic downturns, job changes, and unexpected life circumstances with remarkable equanimity. The social dynamics of 1970s childhood were also unique in ways that shaped their adult psychology. These were children who played outside unsupervised for hours, who resolved conflicts without adult intervention, who learned social navigation through trial and error rather than structured guidance. This created what psychologists call autonomous social development. They learned to read social situations, negotiate disagreements, and form alliances through direct experience rather than instruction. In their adult professional and personal lives, this manifests as individuals who can navigate complex social dynamics without needing explicit rules or constant feedback. They're comfortable with ambiguity in relationships, skilled at reading between the lines in communications, and capable of maintaining professional relationships across different personality types and conflict styles. They learned early that social harmony often requires subtle negotiation, rather than direct confrontation or avoidance. The technological environment of their childhood also created unique psychological patterns. These children experienced technology as helpful tools rather than essential extensions of themselves. Calculators, digital clocks, and early computers were exciting additions to life rather than foundational requirements. This created a relationship with technology characterized by appreciation rather than dependence. As adults navigating our current technological landscape, they tend to use technology purposefully rather than compulsively. They're less likely to experience anxiety when separated from their devices, more likely to notice when technology is enhancing versus detracting from their experience, and better at maintaining boundaries around digital consumption. They learn to live fully engaged lives before technology became ubiquitous, so they retain access to that pre-digital sense of presence and engagement. Perhaps most significantly, people who grew up in the 1970s developed what researchers are beginning to recognize as analog thinking patterns. Their brains learned to process information sequentially, to follow ideas through to completion, and to hold complex thoughts without immediately externalizing them through digital interfaces. This created cognitive habits that serve them well in our current environment of information overload and shortened attention spans. They think in paragraphs rather than bullet points, in chapters rather than tweets. When faced with complex decisions, they naturally create mental space to process multiple variables simultaneously, rather than seeking immediate external input or validation. This isn't slower thinking, it's deeper thinking, cultivated during a time when depth was the default mode of mental processing. The family dynamics of the 1970s created another layer of psychological development that distinguishes this generation. These children often experienced what researchers call benign neglect, which sounds negative but actually fostered remarkable psychological independence. Parents were present and caring but not hovering, involved but not orchestrating every moment of their children's experience. This created individuals who learned to self-regulate emotionally without constant external guidance. In their adult lives, this manifests as people who can sit with difficult emotions without immediately seeking to fix or escape them. They learned early that feelings pass, that boredom transforms into creativity, that disappointment doesn't require immediate intervention. They developed internal emotional regulation systems that function independently of external validation or constant feedback. This makes them particularly well suited to handle the inevitable ups and downs of long-term relationships and career challenges. The educational environment of the 1970s also shaped their cognitive development in distinctive ways. These children experienced learning as something that happened in defined spaces and times. School was school, home was home, and play was play. There wasn't the constant blending of educational entertainment that characterizes modern childhood. This created what psychologists call contextual learning, where their brains learn to shift between different modes of thinking depending on the environment. As adults, they tend to be more capable of true mental downtime. They can separate work thoughts from personal time, can engage in leisure activities without feeling the need to optimize or improve them, and can be present in social situations without their minds constantly processing other responsibilities. They learned that different parts of life serve different purposes, and that trying to multitask across all contexts actually diminishes the quality of each experience. The physical environment of 1970s childhood created sensory experiences that shaped their neural development in ways we're only beginning to understand. These children spent significantly more time outdoors in natural light, engaging with varied textures and temperatures. They climbed trees, built forts, explored neighborhoods on foot or bicycle. This created what researchers call embodied intelligence, where learning happened through physical interaction with the environment rather than abstract consumption of information. In adulthood, this translates to individuals who trust their instincts, who can read situations through subtle physical cues, who make decisions based on how things feel rather than just how they analyze logically. They retained access to somatic intelligence that many people lose when their development happens primarily through screens and structured indoor environments. This makes them particularly skilled at reading people, sensing when something is off in a situation, and making intuitive leaps that prove surprisingly accurate. The consumer culture of the 1970s was also formative in ways that created lasting psychological patterns. These children experienced wanting things but not necessarily getting them immediately. Christmas and birthdays were significant because they represented rare opportunities for major acquisitions. This created what psychologists call gratitude resilience, where satisfaction doesn't require constant novelty or immediate fulfillment. As adults, they tend to derive genuine pleasure from simple experiences that might feel insufficient to generations raised with constant access to new stimulation. They can be satisfied with the same vacation spot year after year, the same restaurant for special occasions, the same hobbies pursued over decades. This isn't lack of ambition or curiosity, it's the ability to find depth within consistency, to extract ongoing meaning from familiar experiences. The communication patterns of 1970s childhood were also unique in ways that shaped their adult psychology. These children experienced conversation as something that happened in real time, without the ability to edit, delete, or research responses. They learned to think on their feet, to be comfortable with imperfect expression, to navigate the natural awkwardness that comes with authentic human interaction. In their adult relationships, this manifests as individuals who are comfortable with conversational silence, who don't feel the need to fill every pause with words or entertainment. They learned that communication includes what's not said as much as what is said, that understanding often happens in the spaces between words. This makes them particularly skilled at intimate relationships that require patience, presence, and the ability to be with another person without constantly trying to improve or optimize the interaction. The pace of life in the 1970s created another psychological distinction that affects how this generation processes stress and change. These children experienced time as something that moved at human pace. News came once a day through television or newspapers. Updates from friends happened through occasional phone calls or face-to-face encounters. Changes in fashion, music, and culture unfolded over months and years rather than weeks and days. This created what researchers call temporal resilience, the ability to maintain psychological equilibrium, even when external circumstances are shifting rapidly. They learned that most changes aren't actually urgent, that apparent crises often resolve themselves given time, and that reactive responses are usually less effective than patient observation followed by thoughtful action. In our current environment of constant updates, breaking news, and social media urgency, people who grew up in the 70s often serve as stabilizing influences in their families and workplaces. They can see beyond the immediate drama to longer-term patterns and trends. They're less likely to be swept up in collective anxiety or mob mentality, because they learned early that most of what feels urgent today will be forgotten tomorrow. The creative environment of 1970s childhood fostered psychological patterns that continue to influence how this generation approaches problem-solving and innovation. These children had access to basic materials but were expected to generate their own entertainment and projects. They built things with their hands, created elaborate imaginary worlds, and learned to see potential in everyday objects and situations. This embedded what psychologists call creative resourcefulness, the ability to generate solutions from whatever materials are available, rather than waiting for perfect conditions or ideal resources. In their adult professional lives, they tend to be the people who can make do with limited budgets, who find innovative approaches when conventional methods aren't available, who see opportunities where others see obstacles. They learned that creativity thrives within constraints rather than despite them, that limitation often sparks innovation in ways that unlimited resources never could. This psychological framework serves them particularly well in our current economy, where adaptability and creative problem-solving are increasingly valued over rigid adherence to established protocols. The peer relationships of 1970s childhood created social psychological patterns that distinguish this generation in profound ways. These children formed friendships through proximity and shared activities rather than curated interests or algorithmic matching. They learned to get along with whoever happened to be in their neighborhood, classroom, or activity group. This fostered what researchers call social adaptability, the ability to find common ground with people across different backgrounds, personalities, and communication styles. In their adult professional and personal lives, they tend to be skilled at building bridges between different groups, at finding shared humanity even when surface-level differences seem significant. They learned early that friendship isn't about finding perfect matches, but about developing the social skills to appreciate and work with the people who happen to be present in your life circumstances. The entertainment landscape of their childhood also shaped their psychological relationship with pleasure and satisfaction in lasting ways. These children experienced delayed gratification not as a moral exercise, but as the natural rhythm of how good things came into their lives. New movies arrived months after theatrical release. New albums were special purchases that required saving money and making deliberate choices. New television shows had seasons that lasted specific periods, with clear beginnings and endings. This created what psychologists call satisfaction sustainability, the ability to extract lasting pleasure from experiences rather than constantly needing novel stimulation to feel engaged. They learned that anticipation itself could be pleasurable, that waiting for something special made the eventual experience more meaningful, and that scarcity often enhanced rather than diminished enjoyment. As adults navigating our current culture of instant access and unlimited options, they often report feeling overwhelmed by choice rather than liberated by it. They learn to find deep satisfaction within limited options, so the abundance of modern life can feel psychologically exhausting rather than enriching. This isn't resistance to progress, but rather a different neurological wiring around how pleasure and satisfaction function in their mental systems. The parental modelling they observed during the 1970s created another layer of psychological development that affects their adult relationships and life choices. These children watch their parents navigate significant social changes around gender roles, work expectations, and family structures, but they processed these observations through the filter of childhood rather than adult analysis. They absorbed lessons about flexibility and adaptation, without the anxiety that comes from understanding all the implications. This created adults who tend to approach major life transitions with remarkable psychological stability. They learned by observation that people can change careers, move to new places, end relationships, and begin new chapters without it representing personal failure or catastrophic disruption. They internalized change as a natural part of life, rather than something to be feared or avoided. The physical independence of 1970s childhood fostered psychological patterns around risk assessment and personal agency that continue to influence their adult decision-making. These children navigated their neighborhoods on foot and bicycle, made their own way to friends' houses, and resolved minor crises without immediate adult intervention. They learned to trust their own judgment about people and situations through direct experience rather than theoretical instruction. In their adult lives, this manifests as individuals who are comfortable making decisions based on intuition and experience rather than external validation or extensive research. They learned early to calibrate their internal risk assessment systems through trial and error, so they tend to be neither recklessly impulsive nor paralyzingly cautious. They developed a psychological middle ground that allows them to take calculated risks while maintaining appropriate caution. The information environment of their childhood created cognitive patterns that serve them particularly well in our current era of information overload. These children learn to process information sequentially and completely, rather than skimming multiple sources simultaneously. They read books from beginning to end, followed news stories as they developed over time, and learned to distinguish between reliable and unreliable sources through repeated experience rather than algorithmic curation. This embedded what researchers call information discernment, the ability to evaluate the credibility and relevance of information without being overwhelmed by its volume or velocity. They learned to think critically about sources, to notice inconsistencies and bias, and to reserve judgment until they had sufficient information to form reliable conclusions. The emotional landscape of 1970s childhood was characterized by what psychologists call emotional authenticity. These children experienced feelings as temporary states that didn't require immediate intervention or optimization. They learned that sadness, anger, frustration, and disappointment were natural parts of life that would pass without permanent damage. They weren't constantly monitored for signs of emotional distress or immediately redirected toward more positive states. This created adults who have unusual comfort with the full spectrum of human emotion. They can sit with difficult feelings without immediately seeking to escape or fix them. They learned that emotions carry information and that trying to shortcut the natural emotional process often creates more problems than it solves. In relationships, this makes them reliable partners who can remain present during difficult conversations and emotional challenges. The consumer culture of their childhood taught them psychological lessons about material possessions that continue to influence their adult behavior. These children learned to take care of things because replacement wasn't automatic or immediate. They repaired broken toys, mended torn clothes, and found creative ways to extend the life of objects they valued. This embedded a psychological relationship with material goods based on stewardship rather than consumption. As adults, they tend to buy fewer things but take better care of what they own. They're more likely to repair rather than replace, to choose quality over quantity, and to find satisfaction in the longevity of their possessions rather than their novelty. This isn't frugality born of necessity, but rather a psychological framework that finds meaning in maintenance and continuity. Perhaps what's most remarkable about people who grew up in the 1970s isn't that they're different, but that they're quietly carrying forward psychological capacities our culture desperately needs. In a world obsessed with optimization and instant results, they remember that some things can't be rushed. In an era of constant connectivity, they know the value of solitude. In times of overwhelming choice, they understand that depth matters more than breadth. They're not trying to prove anything or fix anyone. They're simply living with a psychological toolkit forged in a decade that taught them something we're all still learning: that being fully human requires patience, presence, and the courage to sit with what is rather than constantly reaching for what might be.